Tonight, we drift toward a single accident, a mistake written into the earliest moments of our world, the strange and quiet truth that we were never supposed to be here at all. Everything you know, the ground beneath you, the air in your chest, all of it rests on something that should have cancelled itself out long ago. And yet here we are. Stay with me, and we will follow that ancient era softly, all the way back to the beginning. If these journeys help you rest, a gentle like and subscribe helps others find this quiet place too. And before you drift, tell me softly, where are you listening from tonight, and what hour glows on your clock? Let us begin at the beginning, or as close to it as anything can reach. Before there were stars, before there was darkness for stars to hang in, before there was even space the way you know it, there was a single moment of unimaginable heat. Not heat the way a fire is hot, not heat the way a summer afternoon presses against your skin. This was something older and stranger, a fullness of energy so complete that nothing solid could yet exist within it. The universe was young then, younger than a single breath, younger than the smallest fraction of a second you could ever name. And in that first instant, everything that would ever be was present, but nothing had taken shape. Let yourself rest here for a moment, in that warmth. There was no up and no down. There was no inside and no outside. There was only a vast and seamless brightness, a sea of pure energy filling all of the tiny, expanding everything. And within that brightness, something quiet and astonishing began to happen. Energy began to become substance. Light began to fold itself into matter. This is one of the truest and most beautiful facts the universe has ever shown us. Energy and matter are not two separate things. They are two faces of the same thing, and under the right conditions, one can become the other. In the searing density of those first moments, the conditions were exactly right. The energy was so concentrated that it began to condense into the very first particles, the smallest pieces of substance that exist. And here is where the strangeness begins. When energy becomes matter, it never makes just one thing. It always makes two. For every particle that flickered into being, a second particle appeared beside it, identical in almost every way, yet opposite. A perfect mirror twin. Where one carried a certain charge, the other carried its reverse. Where one was matter, the other was something we call antimatter. Sit with that word for a moment. Antimatter. It sounds like something from a story, something invented to sound mysterious. But it is real as the chair beneath you and the air moving softly in and out of your chest. Antimatter is the exact opposite of ordinary matter, a mirror image at the deepest level of existence. And in the beginning, the universe made it in vast and equal measure, side by side with everything ordinary. Why does this matter, you might wonder, drifting here in the warmth of the early cosmos? It matters because of what happens when the twins meet. When a particle of matter touches its mirror twin of antimatter, they do not simply collide. They do not bounce away or break apart. They vanish, both of them entirely in a single flash. The two opposites cancel each other out completely, and in their place is left nothing but a small burst of pure energy, a flash of light returning to the brightness it came from. Matter meets antimatter, and both are gone, and only light remains. This is annihilation. The word sounds violent, but in the gentle dark of the early universe, it was something closer to a quiet exchange. Substance becoming light, light becoming substance, and then substance becoming light once more. Picture it slowly, the way you might watch snow falling under a street lamp. In the heat of the infant cosmos, Energy was condensing into pairs of particles everywhere, all at once, across the whole of the tiny, expanding everything. A particle and its twin would appear together, born from a flash of energy, and almost at once, somewhere nearby, a particle would meet an opposite twin and annihilate, dissolving back into a flash of energy. Creation and destruction happening side by side, over and over, faster than any clock could ever measure. It was a dance. That is the only word soft enough for it. A dance of appearing and vanishing, of becoming and unbecoming, repeated countless times in every corner of the young universe. Light folding into matter, matter unfolding back into light. The infant cosmos shimmered with this endless exchange, a sea of particles forming and dissolving like patterns on the surface of moving water, and the whole of it was perfectly balanced. That is the part to hold gently in your mind as you settle deeper. For every particle of matter, there was a particle of antimatter. For every act of creation, an act of annihilation waiting to answer it. The books balanced. The ledger of existence added up, on one side and the other, to the very same sum. Matter and antimatter, equal and opposite, born together and destroyed together, in numbers so vast and so even that they seem to mirror one another exactly. Now let yourself follow that balance forward. The universe, in those first moments, was not still. It was expanding, growing larger with every passing instant, stretching outward in all directions at once. And as it expanded, it cooled. The searing density of the beginning began, ever so slightly, to ease. The brightness thinned, and as the heat dropped, something shifted in the great dance. There came a point when the energy of the cosmos was no longer concentrated enough to keep making new pairs of particles. The conditions that had allowed light to fold so freely into matter were fading. The creation slowed, but the annihilation did not. The particles that already existed kept finding their opposite twins, kept meeting them, kept vanishing into flashes of light. And now there was less and less new matter being born to replace what was lost. Do you see where this leads? If matter and antimatter existed in perfectly equal amounts, and if every particle was destined to find its mirror, twin and annihilate, then, as the universe cooled, the great dance should have completed itself. Pair after pair would meet and vanish, substance returning to light, again and again, until there was no substance left to return. Every particle of matter would find a particle of antimatter, and both would dissolve, and what remained would be only energy, only radiation, only a fading glow spreading thinner and thinner across an ever larger emptiness. That is what the rules say should have happened. Let that settle, slowly. A universe of pure light and nothing else. No particles left to gather, no substance left to clump together, no first simple atoms drifting in the dark, no clouds of gas, because there would be no gas, no stars, because there would be nothing for gravity to pull into stars, no galaxies turning slowly in the deep, no planets cooling into stone and water, no oceans, no mountains, no single living cell stirring in a warm and ancient sea, no forests, no rivers, no creatures looking up at a night sky, no one here at all, breathing softly in the dark, listening to a voice describe the beginning of everything. A perfectly balanced universe would have been a perfectly empty one. There is something almost dizzying in that thought, and yet I want you to hold it gently, without alarm. Perfection, here, would have meant absence. If the mirror had been flawless, if matter and antimatter had matched each other exactly, then existence would have cancelled itself out entirely, the way a number and its negative cancel into zero. The whole vast story of the cosmos would have ended before it began, in a quiet flash of light that no one would ever see. Is it not strange to think that we owe everything to imperfection? But I am getting ahead of the story. For now, stay in those cooling moments, in the great slowing dance. Let the heat ease around you. Feel how the universe is growing larger and gentler with each passing instant, how the fierce brightness of the beginning is softening into something less violent, something more spacious. Let your breath slow to match it. In, slowly, and out. There is no rush here. The universe took its time, and so can you. Now, consider what this balance truly means, because it sits at the very heart of why anything exists at all. Matter and antimatter are not merely different. They are exact opposites, and opposites, when they meet, to undo one another. This is not a flaw in the design. It is one of the most fundamental rules we have ever discovered about reality. Charge balances charge. Substance balances anti-substance. The universe, at its deepest level, seems to love symmetry, seems to prefer that everything come in matched and mirrored pairs. And yet symmetry, taken all the way to its end, leads to nothing. This is the gentle paradox to carry with you into sleep. The very rules that make the universe so elegant, so balanced, so beautifully ordered, are the same rules that should have left it empty. A cosmos that played perfectly by its own laws would have erased itself in its first instant, every particle answered by its opposite, every act of creation undone by an equal act of destruction, the books balancing, at last, to zero. So, how is it that you are here? How is it that there is a here at all, a place with substance and weight and warmth, a place with a you inside it to wonder about any of this? Let that question rest in you softly, like a stone settling to the bottom of a still pond. You do not need to answer it tonight. You do not need to understand it fully. It is enough, for now, simply to feel the wonder of it, the quiet astonishment that anything survived the great dance at all. Because something did survive. We know that much with absolute certainty. We know it because you are here, and the ground is here, and the stars are here, scattered across the dark in their countless billions. The universe did not cancel itself out. The mirror was not perfect. Somewhere in those first cooling moments, in the endless meeting and vanishing of matter and antimatter, the balance failed, just slightly, just enough. But we are not there yet. Tonight, in this part of the journey, I only want you to feel the weight of the problem itself, the sheer improbability sitting at the foundation of everything. By every rule we understand, the universe should have annihilated itself entirely. Matter and antimatter, born in equal measure, should have found one another and dissolved into light, leaving behind a cosmos of radiation and nothing more. That is the law. That is what the symmetry demands. And the law is almost never broken. Imagine, for a moment, how strange this is to the people who study it. The physicists who trace the history of the cosmos backward, instant by instant, into that first searing heat, find themselves facing this same quiet contradiction. Their equations are beautiful. Their understanding of the early universe is precise, in ways that would astonish you. They can describe the dance of creation and annihilation in extraordinary detail, can calculate how the pairs formed and how they vanished, can follow the cooling and the expanding with remarkable confidence. And every time they run the numbers, The numbers say the same thing. The universe should be empty. By the best accounting we have, matter and antimatter were made in such perfectly equal amounts that they should have consumed one another completely. There should be no leftover substance. There should be no us. The most careful, most rigorous understanding of how everything began points again and again toward a cosmos that erased itself in its opening moment. And yet, here we are. This is not a small puzzle. It is one of the deepest open questions in all of science, a mystery that sits beneath every other thing we know. Why is there something rather than nothing? Not as a poem, not as a riddle, but as a genuine physical question with a genuine physical weight. Why did the great cancellation leave anything behind at all? Let the size of that question hold you for a moment, the way deep water holds a swimmer who has stopped struggling and simply floats. You are made of the something that should not be here. The atoms in your hands, the warmth in your blood, the slow rhythm of your breathing, all of it is built from particles that, by every rule we understand, should have met their mirror twins long ago and dissolved into light. You are a survivor of the great dance. Though you never danced it, you are what remained when the books did not balance. Is that not a tender thing to consider, lying here in the dark? Every solid thing you have ever touched, every person you have ever loved, every star you have ever seen, is part of the same impossible remainder, the same small surplus that somehow escaped the perfect symmetry of the beginning. We are all made of the leftover. We are all the part that did not cancel out. But tonight, I do not want to rush toward the answer. Some part of the wonder lives in the question itself, in simply allowing yourself to feel how unlikely your own existence truly is. Not in a way that frightens, but in a way that softens. You did not have to be here. By the strictest reading of the cosmos, none of this had to be here. And the fact that it is, the fact that you are, is something quietly miraculous, written into the very first instant of time. So let the early universe expand around you, vast and cooling and bright. Let the great dance continue in your imagination, the endless meeting and vanishing of opposites, the patient return of substance into light. Feel the balance of it, the perfect mirrored symmetry that should have led to nothing at all, and hold, gently, the quiet impossibility at the center. By every rule we understand, the books should have balanced to zero. Matter and antimatter, equal and opposite, born together and destroyed together, leaving behind a universe of pure and empty light. That is what the law demands. That is what the symmetry requires. And somehow, against all of it, the law was broken. Just barely. Just once. Just enough to leave behind a little dust. But that, my quiet companion, is where we will go next. For now, simply rest in the warmth of the beginning, in the strange and beautiful fact that you exist at all, in a universe that had every reason to erase itself, and somehow, gently, chose not to. Let your breath settle. Let the question soften, and let the early light hold you, here at the edge of everything, where the story of you first began. So the mirror was not perfect after all. We left the early universe in the middle of its great dance, that endless meeting of matter and antimatter, that patient folding of light into substance and substance back into light. And we left it with a question, soft and enormous, resting at the center of everything. If the balance was truly perfect, then nothing should remain. The cosmos should have cancelled itself out entirely, leaving only a fading glow. And yet here you are. So somewhere, in that first cooling instant, the perfect mirror must have held a flaw, a tiny crack, a place where the symmetry did not quite hold, where the matched and mirrored pairs did not match quite perfectly after all. Let yourself drift toward that floor now, gently, the way you might lean closer to examine something small and precious. The imbalance was almost unimaginably slight. This is the part to hold with great tenderness, because the smallness of it is the whole miracle. For every particle of antimatter in the early universe, there was not exactly one particle of matter. There was a little more, just the faintest excess, just the smallest surplus tipping the scales towards substance rather than nothing. How small was this excess? Let me try to give it to you in a way you can almost feel. Imagine 1 billion particles of antimatter. 1 billion. The number is already too large for the mind to truly hold, so let us slow it down. 1 billion seconds is nearly 32 years, more than enough time for a child to be born and grow into an adult. 1 billion grains of sand would fill many buckets, more than you could carry in a lifetime of trips to the shore. 1 billion is a number that stretches well past the edge of what we can really picture. Now hold that 1 billion particles of antimatter in your mind. Beside them, the universe placed 1 billion particles of matter, and then one more. One. That was the flaw in the mirror. For every 1 billion pairs that met and vanished and dissolved back into light, a single particle of matter was left standing alone, with no opposite twin to cancel it, no mirror image to dissolve into. One survivor among 2 billion, one quiet exception in an ocean of perfect symmetry. Sit with how small that is. Imagine standing on a beach and being told that of every 1 billion grains of sand, all but one will vanish, and only that single remaining grain will be allowed to stay. Imagine the entire shoreline emptying, grain after grain after grain, disappearing into light, until what is left could rest on the tip of your finger without you even noticing its weight. That is the scale of what happened. That is how close the universe came to keeping nothing at all. The great annihilation swept through the cosmos exactly as the rules demanded. Pair after pair, matter meeting antimatter, both dissolving into a flash of light. Almost all of it cancelled. Almost all of it returned to the brightness it came from. The dance completed itself, very nearly to the end, but not quite. For every 1 billion pairs that vanished, one particle of matter remained, untouched, unpaired, with nothing left to destroy it. And those lonely survivors, those rare leftover particles scattered thinly through the cooling dark, those are the dust from which everything you have ever known was eventually made. Let that reframe settle into you slowly. Everything solid in all of existence is the residue of an almost complete erasure. Every star, every planet, every stone, every drop of water, every living thing, every atom in your own body, all of it is the leftover, the remainder, the small surplus that escaped the great cancellation. The universe nearly erased itself completely. It came within one part in 1 billion of being nothing at all. And what survived that erasure, that thin and improbable remainder, is the entire material world. You are made of the dust that was left over. I want you to feel the weight of that without any fear in it. We do not often think of ourselves as residue, as the part that remained after almost everything was lost. But there is something deeply tender in it. The matter that makes up your hands, your heart, your slow and steady breathing was spared, not chosen, not protected, simply spared by an imbalance so faint that we still struggle to explain it. You are the one grain in 1 billion that the universe did not take back. And here is the part that should fill you with quiet wonder. We do not fully know why. This is one of the great open mysteries of all of physics, and I want to be honest with you about that, because the honesty is part of the beauty. The scientists who study the beginning of the universe can describe the great dance with extraordinary precision. They can calculate how the pairs formed and how they vanished. They can trace the cooling and the expanding with remarkable confidence. But when they ask why there was that tiny excess of matter, why the mirror held a flaw at all, why the universe tipped ever so slightly toward something rather than nothing, the equations grow quiet. By the simplest reading of the laws we know, there should have been no excess. Matter and antimatter should have been made in perfectly equal amounts, and they should have annihilated each other completely, and the universe should be empty. The fact that it is not empty, the fact that there was that one extra particle in every billion, points to something we do not yet fully understand about the deepest workings of reality. There are clues. There are careful ideas with careful names. Scientists have found that the mirror between matter and antimatter is not always perfectly symmetrical, that in certain rare interactions, the two opposites behave just slightly differently from one another. These small asymmetries, glimpsed in delicate experiments, hint at how the early universe might have come to prefer matter so faintly over its opposite. But the full answer, the complete and satisfying explanation for why anything exists at all, remains just beyond our reach. Is that not a remarkable thing to rest beside? The reason for your own existence, traced all the way back to its root, ends in a genuine and acknowledged mystery. Not a mystery in the sense of something spooky or unknowable, but a mystery in the truest scientific sense, a question we can ask clearly and precisely and have not yet been able to answer. Why did the universe keep one particle in a billion? Why did it choose substance over emptiness? We do not know, not yet, and somehow that makes the dust we are made of even more precious. Let your breath slow here, in the presence of that open question. There is no pressure to solve it. There is only the gentle privilege of being made from its answer, whatever that answer turns out to be. Now, let us follow those survivors forward, those lonely leftover particles drifting in the cooling dark. The great annihilation had ended. The fierce dance of creation and destruction had played itself out, and the universe was quieter now, dimmer, no longer the searing brightness of the first instant. The flash of all that vanished matter had spread outward into a sea of light, a glow filling the whole of the expanding everything. And scattered thinly through that glow were the survivors, the matter that had no antimatter left to meet, drifting alone. These were not yet atoms. They were something simpler, something more fundamental. They were the first particles of substance, the smallest building blocks, waiting for the universe to cool enough for them to come together. As the cosmos expanded and the heat continued to ease, those particles began to find one another. Some of them gathered into the cores of what would become the simplest things in all of existence. Protons, the heart of the lightest element. Neutrons, their quiet companions. In the warmth of the young universe, these tiny pieces cooled and slowed and began, ever so gently, to bind. Picture it softly. After all the violence of the great cancellation, after the near total erasure, what remained was not chaos, but a slow and patient coming together. The survivors, drifting alone for so long, began to find partners of a different kind, not the opposite twins that would have destroyed them, but companions that could join with them and hold. And from this gentle binding came the first true substance of the universe. Hydrogen, the simplest element of all, a single proton with the lightest possible structure, the most basic thing that matter can be. And helium, a little heavier, formed when those first particles bound together in the warmth of the early cosmos. Hydrogen and helium, the two oldest elements, the first ingredients of everything that would ever follow. Let that settle. The entire periodic table of elements you may have once seen on a classroom wall, all those many kinds of matter, every metal and gas and mineral, all of it would eventually come from these humble beginnings. But in the young universe, there were only these two, the simplest and the lightest, drifting in vast and tenuous clouds through the cooling dark. There is a particular moment in this cooling that deserves your quiet attention. For a long while, even after the protons and neutrons had formed, the universe was still too hot and too bright for complete atoms to exist. The light filling the cosmos was so energetic that it kept knocking the pieces apart, kept the particles from settling into stable, finished atoms. The universe glowed, but it was a kind of fog, a brightness so dense that light itself could not travel freely through it. And then, as the expansion continued and the heat eased further, a threshold was crossed. The universe cooled just enough for the particles to finally bind into complete, stable atoms. The protons captured their companions and held them. The simplest atoms of hydrogen and helium formed, fully and at last, throughout the whole of the cosmos. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened to the light. It was set free. For the first time, the light that had been trapped in the dense fog of the early universe could travel without being scattered. The cosmos became clear. The fog lifted. And that ancient light, released in that moment, is still traveling now, still drifting through space. The oldest light there is, a faint and patient glow that fills the whole sky if you have the instruments to see it. It is the afterglow of the beginning, the light that was finally let loose when the first atoms formed. But let us not drift too far. Return to the young universe just after this moment and look at what it had become. The brightness had faded. The fierce heat of the beginning was gone. What remained was a vast and darkening expanse, growing larger with every passing moment, and filling that expanse, thin and quiet and almost imperceptibly faint, was gas. Clouds of hydrogen and helium, the simplest atoms, spread across the whole of the cooling dark. This is the image I want to leave you with tonight, as you settle deeper into rest. A young universe, dim and cooling and immense. No stars yet, no galaxies, no planets, no light from any sun, because no sun had yet been born. Only darkness, and within the darkness, thin clouds of the simplest gas, drifting slowly through the expanding everything. It looks, at first, like almost nothing. A dark and empty space filled with the faintest haze. But hold this thought as you drift towards sleep. That thin gas held everything. Every star that would ever shine was waiting in those clouds. Every galaxy that would ever turn slowly in the deep was present there. In potential, in the patient drift of hydrogen and helium. Every planet that would ever cool into stone, every ocean that would ever fill, every mountain, every river, every forest, every living thing that would ever stir and breathe and look up at the night. All of it was contained, somehow, in that quiet haze of simple gas. The dust that survived the great erasure, the one particle in a billion, had become the raw material of everything to come. It did not look like much. It was thin and dark and silent. But it was the seed of all things, scattered across the young cosmos, waiting for the next chapter to begin, waiting for gravity to gather it, waiting for the first stars to ignite. Let yourself rest in that waiting. There is no hurry in it. The universe was patient. The gas drifted for a long, long while in the cooling dark, in no rush at all, simply being what it was, holding within itself the promise of everything. And you can hold that same patience now, breathing slowly, settling deeper, knowing that the story unfolds gently and in its own time. Feel how far we have come already in these first quiet moments of the journey. We began in the searing heat of the beginning, in the great dance of matter and antimatter, in the perfect symmetry that should have left a universe of pure and empty light. We watched that symmetry hold, almost completely, almost to the very end. And then we found the flaw, the faintest imbalance, the one particle in a billion that escaped the great cancellation. We followed those survivors as they cooled and gathered, as they formed the first protons and neutrons, as they bound at last into the simplest atoms. And we arrived here, in a young and darkening universe, filled with thin clouds of hydrogen and helium, holding within them everything that would ever exist. You are made of that survival. You are made of that leftover dust, that improbable remainder, that small surplus the universe somehow kept. And the gas is still drifting now, in your imagination, thin and quiet and dark, full of patient promise. Let it drift. Let your breath grow slow and even, like the slow expansion of that young cosmos. Let the simplicity of it hold you, the two oldest elements spread across the gentle dark, waiting without worry, waiting without rush, for the light that has not yet been born. The first stars are coming, but not yet, not tonight. Tonight there is only the soft and patient gas, holding everything, asking nothing, and you, resting safely within the story it became. We left the young universe filled with thin gas, drifting and patient, holding everything within it and asking nothing. So let us return there now, to that quiet darkness, and watch what the gas became. For a long while, nothing seemed to happen. The clouds of hydrogen and helium drifted through the cooling dark, spread so thinly that they were closer to emptiness than to substance. There was no light anywhere. No star had yet been born to break the darkness. The universe was vast and silent and dim, a great expanse of gentle haze going nowhere in particular. But the gas was not truly still. Within those clouds, something patient was at work, something so quiet you could almost miss it, something that needed nothing but time, gravity. The faint and tireless pull that every piece of matter exerts on every other piece, the gentle insistence that things should draw together. In the thin gas, gravity began, ever so slowly, to gather. Let yourself feel the slowness of it. Where the gas was very slightly denser, where a few more atoms happened to drift close together, gravity pulled a little harder. And because it pulled a little harder, a few more atoms drifted in. And because more atoms had gathered, gravity pulled harder still. It was a slow accumulation, a quiet snowballing across spans of time so long they softened the mind to consider them. The denser regions grew denser. The gathering places gathered more. The thin haze began, here and there, to clump and thicken and pull itself inward. This is the first relationship in the long chain we will follow tonight, and it is worth holding gently. Gravity gathered the gas, and because the gas gathered, it grew warm. Why would gathering make warmth? Because as the gas fell inward, pulled tighter and tighter by its own growing weight, the particles within it moved faster, pressed closer, collided more often. And that pressing and colliding is what heat truly is, the motion of countless tiny things crowded together. The more the gas gathered, the hotter its center became. A cold and quiet cloud, simply by drawing itself together, began to warm at its heart, and the gathering continued, and the warmth grew. And at the center of these collapsing clouds, the heat climbed higher and higher, past anything the universe had felt since the searing brightness of the beginning, until, at last, a threshold was crossed. In the crushing heat at the core of a gathered cloud, the hydrogen atoms were pressed so close and moving so fast that they began to fuse. Two of the simplest atoms, driven together by the immense pressure, merged into something slightly heavier, and in that merging, they released a small flash of energy, and then another pair fused, and another, and the flashes joined into a steady pouring out of light and heat, a furnace igniting at the heart of the collapsing gas. A star was born. Let that settle softly. In the long darkness of the young universe, the first stars kindled into light. The gas that had drifted patiently for so long, the leftover dust of the great erasure, had gathered itself into furnaces, and the furnaces had caught fire. For the first time there was light in the cosmos that was not the fading afterglow of the beginning. There was new light, made fresh, pouring out from the cores of the first stars. Imagine that, after all the dark. The first dawn the universe had ever known, scattered across the deep in points of fragile brilliance. But the light is not the wonder I most want to share with you tonight. The wonder is what was happening inside those stars, deep in their burning cores, hidden from all view. Because a star is not only a source of light, a star is a forge. Remember that the young universe held only the two simplest elements, hydrogen and helium, the lightest and most basic kinds of matter. Everything else, every heavier element, every kind of atom that makes up the solid world you know, did not yet exist. There was no carbon, no oxygen, no iron, no calcium, no gold. The universe was made of only its two oldest ingredients, and nothing more. So where did all the rest come from? It came from the stars. It was cooked inside them. In the crushing heat of a stellar core, the fusing of atoms did not stop at the first step. As a star burned through its hydrogen, fusing it into helium, the helium itself began to gather and press and warm. And in time, the helium too began to fuse, merging into something heavier still. 3 helium atoms, driven together in the core, could fuse into carbon. Carbon. Let that word rest in you for a moment, because it is not a stranger to you. Carbon is the element of life. It is the backbone of nearly every molecule in your body, the framework on which living things are built. The carbon in your cells, in your skin, in the slow machinery of every breath you take, was made exactly this way, 3 lighter atoms fusing in the heart of a star. And the building did not stop there. In the cores of the most massive stars, the furnaces burned hotter and hotter as they aged, and each new stage of fusion built heavier elements from lighter ones. Carbon fused into heavier things. Those fused into heavier things still. Oxygen formed, the very element you are breathing now, drawn in and out of your chest without a thought. Nitrogen formed, and silicon, and sulfur, and many more, each one cooked in turn as the star worked its way up through the elements, building substance from substance in the crushing dark of its core. This is the wonder to hold most tenderly tonight. You are made of these. The oxygen in your lungs, the carbon in your every cell, the calcium in your bones, the nitrogen woven through you. All of it was forged inside stars. Not stars in some abstract sense, but real stars, particular stars, furnaces that burned long ago in the deep of the universe. The atoms that make up your body spent time in the heart of a star before they ever became you. They were cooked in stellar fire, in heat beyond anything you could imagine, in furnaces that have long since gone dark. You are made of star material. This is not a poem. It is a plain and literal fact. The substance of you was assembled in the cores of ancient stars. But here we come to something that may surprise you, and I want to walk through it gently, because it carries a kind of tenderness that is easy to miss. The star, for all its power, could not give you these elements while it lived. Think about that. The carbon, the oxygen, the iron, all of it was being made deep in the core, locked away in the heart of the furnace, far from the cold dark of space. A living star holds its treasures tightly. The elements it builds are buried at its center, useless to any future world, trapped inside the very fire that made them. As long as the star lived, the substance of you remained imprisoned in its core. So how did it get out? Here is the chain, the relationship and consequence that shaped everything. For the elements to be free, the star had to die, and not gently. A massive star, having built its heavier elements layer upon layer, eventually reaches a limit. It builds its way up through the elements until it makes iron at its core. And iron, for reasons woven into the deepest workings of matter, is the end of the line. Fusing iron does not release energy the way fusing lighter elements does. It takes energy instead. And so when a star fills its core with iron, the furnace falters. The outward push of all that fusion, the force that had held the star up against its own immense weight, suddenly fails, and the star collapses. In an instant, the core falls inward under its own crushing gravity, and then it rebounds in a detonation, so violent, so bright, so unimaginably powerful, that for a brief while, a single dying star can outshine an entire galaxy of others. This is a supernova, the most violent event the universe produces, the death of a great star in a single overwhelming flash. And in that death, the treasures are released. The supernova tears the star apart and flings its substance outward across space, scattering all those carefully forged elements into the dark. The carbon, the oxygen, the iron, everything the star spent its life building, is thrown out into the cosmos in the moment of its destruction. The forge breaks open, and its contents spill across the void. Let yourself feel the strange tenderness of this. The calm elements of your body, the quiet carbon and gentle oxygen, the iron that rides so peacefully in your blood, were not only born in fire, they were freed in catastrophe. The most violent events the universe knows how to make were necessary for the most ordinary substance of you to exist. Creation, here, required destruction. The star had to die, and die violently, for you to ever have the chance to live. There is no alarm in this. I want you to receive it as something soft. The violence is long over. The stars that made you finished their dying ages ago, scattering their gifts into the dark before the earth was even a thought. What reaches you now is not the violence, but the inheritance. You carry, in the most peaceful corners of your body, the residue of ancient cataclysms, transformed entirely into something gentle. The fury became flesh. The explosion became you, breathing slowly in the dark. Is that not a tender thing to hold? That the iron in your blood remembers, in its own quiet way, the death of a star. Now, there is a general rule here, and the rule is beautiful on its own. Stars build the elements up to iron, and supernovae scatter them across space. That alone could account for so much of what you are made of. But the universe, as it so often does, has an exception waiting, and the exception is even more astonishing than the rule, because some elements are too heavy to be made even by an ordinary dying star. Think of gold. Think of the gold in a ring, in a coin, in anything precious you have ever held. Gold is far heavier than iron, and the gentle fusion of a living star cannot build it, and even an ordinary supernova struggles to make much of it. Gold required something rarer, something even more extreme. The current understanding is remarkable. Much of the gold in the universe, and other very heavy elements, was forged in the collision of dead stars. When a massive star dies, it can leave behind a small, impossibly dense remnant, a neutron star, a city-sized object so heavy that a single spoonful would weigh more than a mountain. And sometimes Two of these dead remnants find each other, locked in a slow spiral, drawing closer over vast ages, until at last they collide. When neutron stars collide, the conditions are so extreme, so far beyond anything an ordinary star can produce, that the very heaviest elements are forged in the chaos and flung outward into space. The gold that exists anywhere in the cosmos was very likely made this way, in the rarest and most violent meetings of already dead stars. Sit with that for a moment, gently. The heaviest, most precious things were not made by living stars at all, but by the collisions of their corpses. An exception to the rule, an even rarer cataclysm, needed to bring the heaviest elements into being. And so the substance of the universe was built not by a single process, but by many, each one rarer and more extreme than the last, each one contributing its part to the slow filling of the cosmos with the raw material of worlds. And that filling is the image I want to leave you with as you drift deeper towards sleep. Picture the long ages of the universe unfolding. The first stars are born from the thin gas, and they live and they die in flashes of light, scattering their forged elements into the dark. And from that enriched gas, now no longer only hydrogen and helium, but seeded with carbon and oxygen and iron, new clouds gather, and gravity pulls them together again, and new stars are born, richer than the first, holding within them the gifts of the stars that came before. And those stars live and die and scatter their substance too, and from their remains, richer still, another generation gathers and ignites. Generation after generation of stars, each one born from the ashes of the last, each one adding its own forged elements to the slow enrichment of the cosmos. The dark gas is seeded, again and again, with heavier and heavier substance, until the universe is no longer a thin haze of two simple elements, but a rich and varied broth of everything. It is slow, it is patient, it takes spans of time so vast that the mind can only soften before them. But across those ages, the cosmos fills, quietly, generation by generation, with the raw material of worlds, the carbon that will become forests, the oxygen that will fill oceans and lungs, the iron that will sink into the cores of planets and ride through the blood of living things, the gold that will gleam in the crust of worlds not yet formed. All of it is being made, out there in the dark, in the lives and deaths of stars. Let that slow enrichment hold you now, as your breathing settles and the day grows distant. You are downstream of all of it. Every atom in you waited through generations of stars, was forged and freed and scattered and gathered again and again across unimaginable time, until at last it came together as you. You are not separate from the cosmos. You are made of its patient work, the product of forges that no longer exist, the inheritor of ancient fire turned tender. The stars lived and died and gave you their substance. And now, in the quiet dark, that substance rests, breathing slowly, settling deeper. The forges have done their work. The dark is filling with the stuff of worlds. And somewhere in that enriched and waiting gas, though it does not know it yet, the material that will one day become a single small blue planet is drifting quietly toward the next chapter of the story. But that is for another night. For now, simply rest in the warmth of your inheritance. Let the ancient fire hold you gently. Let the long patience of the stars carry you down into sleep. You are made of their gift, and the gift is at peace. So far we have wandered through the whole of the cosmos, through the great dance of the beginning, through the forges of the stars, through the slow enrichment of the dark across unimaginable ages. Tonight, let us do something different. Let us narrow our gaze. Let us leave the vastness behind and drift down toward a single quiet corner of one ordinary galaxy, to a particular cloud of enriched gas and dust, drifting in the dark, holding within it the makings of a world. This is where you come from. Not the universe in general, but this one small place. The cloud was nothing remarkable to look at. It was cold and dim, a drifting haze of hydrogen and helium, seeded with all the heavier elements that generations of dying stars had scattered into the dark. Carbon was in it, and oxygen, and iron, and traces of gold. The ashes of countless ancient stars, gathered together in one quiet region, waiting as the gas had always waited, patient and slow. And then, as it had so many times before, gravity began to gather. Perhaps the shockwave of a distant dying star gave it the first nudge. Perhaps it simply reached the moment when its own weight was enough. However it began, the cloud started to collapse, drawing itself inward, the denser regions pulling harder, the gathering feeding on itself. And at the center, where the most material crowded together, the heat began to climb, just as it had in the first stars, just as it always does when matter gathers. The center grew hotter and denser and brighter, until at last the threshold was crossed and the core ignited. Your sun was born. Let yourself rest in that for a moment. The sun that warms your days, that you have squinted up at, that has risen over every morning of your entire life, kindled into light in exactly this way, from the collapse of an enriched cloud in a quiet corner of the dark. It was young then, fierce and new, pouring out light into a region that had never known it. But the sun did not take all of the cloud. This is the part I want you to picture gently, because it is where you truly begin to come from. As the cloud collapsed, it did not fall straight inward. It spun, and as it gathered toward the center, that spinning gathered too, the way a turning thing spins faster as it draws itself in. The leftover material that did not fall into the new sun was flung out into a vast, flattened disk, a great turning plate of gas and dust circling the young star, glowing faintly in the new light. Picture that disk slowly, turning in the dark, a young sun at its center, and around it a wide, swirling plain of debris, the leftover ashes of dead stars, going round and round in the gentle dark. Everything that would ever exist in this corner of the cosmos was in that disk. Every planet, every moon, every stone, and every drop of water. All of it, swirling, waiting, as the gas had always waited. And within the disk, the gathering began again, but smaller now, more local. Here and there in the turning plate, grains of dust drifted close and stuck together. Tiny clumps formed, and the clumps drew in more dust, and grew, and collided with other clumps, and merged. It was slow at first, a quiet accumulation of dust into pebbles, pebbles into rocks, rocks into boulders. And as these grew larger, their own faint gravity began to help, pulling in more material, sweeping up the dust and debris in their paths. The boulders became mountains. The mountains became small worlds. And the small worlds, circling the young sun, collided with one another, sometimes shattering, sometimes merging, gradually building larger and larger bodies through countless collisions across long ages. The disk was a place of slow and constant impact, a patient violence of things crashing and joining and growing. And out of all that crashing, the planets began to take shape. One of them, circling at a particular distance from the young sun, gathered itself together from the swept-up debris of its path. It was not yet the world you know. It was a young, hot, restless thing, still molten in places, still being struck by the leftover rubble of the disk, still finding its shape. But it was forming, this early Earth, a rocky world cooling slowly in the dark, circling its star. And here we arrive at the heart of tonight's part of the journey, the accident, the mistake written into the title of all of this. Because the young Earth was not alone in its path. There was another world forming nearby, in a similar orbit, gathering its own material from the same swirling disk. Scientists have given it a name, Theia, after a figure from old stories, the mother of the moon. Theia was a young world too, roughly the size of the planet Mars, building itself from the same debris in nearly the same orbit as the young Earth. Two worlds, forming too close together. Do you feel the quiet inevitability in that? Two growing planets, sharing nearly the same path around the sun, drawing on the same material, circling in the dark. Such an arrangement cannot last. The orbits were not perfectly stable. Across long ages, the two worlds drifted, drawn by the subtle pulls of everything around them, until their paths crossed, and the two young planets collided. Let me give you the scale of this gently, because the words alone cannot carry it. Imagine two worlds, each one larger than anything you could ever stand upon and survey, each one a vast sphere of rock and metal, drifting toward one another across the dark. They did not strike like two stones clicking together. They met at a speed beyond imagining, a glancing, catastrophic blow between two planet-sized bodies. The young Earth was very nearly destroyed. The impact was so immense that it melted much of both worlds. Theia, the smaller of the two, was largely torn apart in the collision, its substance merging into the young Earth, sinking down toward the center, becoming part of the world you now stand upon. The Earth itself was shattered and reshaped, its surface turned to a sea of molten rock, glowing in the dark, utterly transformed by the violence of the meeting. And from that violence, an enormous amount of material was thrown outward into space. Picture it. The collision flung a vast cloud of molten debris up off the surface of the wounded Earth, a great ring of vaporized and shattered rock spreading out around the planet, glowing, turning slowly in the dark. The young Earth, reeling from the blow, now wore a ring of its own scattered substance, the thrown-off pieces of two worlds that had become one. And then, as everything in this story does, that debris began to gather. The ring of molten rock circling the wounded Earth started to draw itself together under its own gravity. The countless pieces, flung out by the impact, began to clump and merge, just as the disk around the sun had done, just as the dust had always done. And out of that gathering ring, a new body formed, cooling, taking shape, settling into a sphere. The moon was born. Let that settle softly. The moon that hangs in your night sky, that has watched over every dark you have ever known, that pulls gently at the seas, was born from the wreckage of a catastrophe. It is made in part from the substance of a world that no longer exists, from Theia and from the young Earth, thrown together in the violence of their meeting and gathered into a single quiet companion. Now here is where I want you to feel the strange and tender mathematics of this, because this is the heart of why we say the world was built by a mistake. That collision should have been a disaster. By every ordinary reckoning, two planets meeting in such a way is an ending, a destruction, a catastrophe almost beyond comprehension. And in the moment, it was. But across the long ages that followed, that single act of violence turned, against all odds, toward calm. The catastrophe quietly made the world livable. Consider what the impact gave you. It gave you the moon, and the moon steadies the Earth, a spinning world, left to itself, can wobble on its axis over long ages, tipping this way and that, throwing its surface into wild and shifting extremes. But the moon, our companion born of catastrophe, holds the earth steady. It calms the wobble. It keeps the tilt of the world gentle and stable across the ages, and that gentle, stable tilt is the very thing that gives you seasons. The soft turning of spring into summer, into autumn, into winter, the rhythm that has shaped every living thing on the planet, exists because a world was shattered long ago and left behind a steadying moon. The impact also set the spin of the earth, the turning that gives you day and night, the gentle rhythm of light and dark that orders every life upon the surface. And the moon, hanging in the sky, pulls at the seas. The tides that breathe in and out along every shore, the slow rising and falling of the oceans, are the moon's quiet work. The same companion born of violence now draws the waters gently back and forth, a soft and endless rhythm that has stirred the seas since the first oceans formed. Do you feel the contrast in this? Hold the two images side by side as you drift. On one side, the brutality. Two worlds colliding at unthinkable speed, one of them destroyed, the other melted to a glowing sea of rock, a ring of vaporized debris spreading across the dark, the most violent thing that could happen to a world. And on the other side, what it became. Gentle seasons, the soft turn of day into night, the quiet breathing of the tides along a moonlit shore, the steadiness that let life take hold and endure. The most violent thing that could happen to a world became the very foundation of its peace. The catastrophe made the calm, the wound became the cradle. There is something almost unbearably tender in that, if you let yourself feel it. The world was not built by gentleness. It was built by an accident so violent it nearly ended everything before it began. And yet that accident, across the patient ages, turned toward gentleness, until it gave us a planet steady and rhythmic enough to hold life. Let us follow that turning toward calm now, as you settle deeper. After the great impact, the young Earth was a molten and glowing thing, its surface a sea of liquid rock, far too hot for anything to last upon it. But the universe, as always, was patient, and the world, left to circle its star, began to cool. Slowly, across long ages, the molten surface hardened, the glowing sea of rock dimmed and crusted over, forming the first solid ground, a thin and fragile skin over the still warm depths. The world grew quieter. The fierce heat of its violent birth began, gently, to fade. And then came the water. The early earth held water within it, locked in its rocks, and more was delivered from the dark, carried in on the icy bodies that still rained down from the leftover debris of the disk. As the surface cooled, the water that had been vapor in the hot early air began to gather, to condense, to fall. Rain came to the young world, not a brief rain, but a long one, an age of rain, falling and falling onto the cooling rock. And the water gathered, as everything in this story gathers. It pooled in the low places. It filled the basins and the hollows of the young crust. It spread and deepened and joined, until the gathered water became something vast and continuous, something that had never existed in this corner of the cosmos before. The first oceans. Picture them settling gently across the face of the cooling world. The rain easing at last, the waters growing still, the young earth wrapped now in seas where before there had been only molten rock. The surface that had glowed with the heat of catastrophe now held quiet oceans, dark and deep, breathing softly with the pull of the moon born from the same disaster that had nearly destroyed everything. And so we arrive at the image I want to leave with you tonight. as your breathing slows and the day drifts far away. A young blue world, resting in the dark. It was new. It was improbable. By every ordinary reckoning, it should not have been gentle at all. It had been forged in collision, shattered and remade, struck so hard that part of it was flung into the sky to become a moon. It had been a sea of molten rock, glowing in the void. And yet here it was now, cooled and quiet, wrapped in oceans, steadied by its companion, turning gently through its days and nights, tilting softly through what would one day be seasons. A blue world, alone in the dark, circling its young Sunday. There was no life upon it yet, no green upon the land, no creature stirring in the seas. It was only stone and water and air, turning quietly in the dark. But it was livable now. It was steady. It was gentle. The catastrophe had done its work and turned, against all odds, toward calm. The wound had become a cradle, and the cradle was waiting. Let yourself rest beside it. Feel how far the story has traveled to reach this moment. From the great dance of the beginning, through the forges of the stars, through the slow enrichment of the dark, down to this single quiet corner, this collapsing cloud, this young sun, this swirling disk, this terrible collision, this blue world cooling under a newborn moon. All of it had to happen. The violence had to occur. The accident had to nearly destroy everything, so that the steadiness it left behind could one day hold a living world. And now the blue world rests in the dark, improbable and new, wrapped in its quiet oceans, steadied by its companion, breathing softly with the tides. It does not know what it will become. It does not know that one day, in its gentle seas, something will stir. It only turns, slowly, in the dark, cooling toward calm. And you can turn with it now, settling deeper, breathing slow and even, resting on the very world that violence built and patience gentled. The catastrophe is long over. The calm has come. And the blue world, against all odds, is waiting for life. But that is for another night. We left a young blue world resting in the dark, wrapped in quiet oceans, steadied by its newborn moon, waiting without knowing what it waited for. Tonight, let us stay with that world and watch the most improbable thing of all begin to stir within it. But before life, let us sit for a moment with how fragile the whole arrangement was. Because the world was livable, yes, but livable is a narrow thing. It is a thin band of conditions, a slender window, and so many things had to fall just so for that window to open at all. Consider where the earth came to rest. It circles the sun at a particular distance, neither too close nor too far. Closer, and the warmth would have been too fierce. The oceans boiling away into vapor, the surface scorched and dry. Farther, and the cold would have been too deep, the water locked forever into ice, the world a frozen stone turning in the dark. But the earth settled into the narrow band, where water could remain liquid, where it could pool and flow and gather into seas. A little nearer the sun, a little farther, and there would have been no oceans at all. How easily it might have been otherwise. And consider the water itself. So much had to happen for it to be here, locked in the rocks, carried in on icy bodies from the dark, rained down across long ages onto the cooling crust. Water is not a small thing. It is the place where life would begin, the medium in which the first living things would stir. Without it, the story simply ends. And yet here it was, gathered into vast and quiet seas, waiting. How easily there might have been none. And consider the field that wraps the earth, invisible and silent, the magnetic shield that streams out from the molten metal deep at the planet's core. You cannot see it, but it is always there, turning aside the fierce particles that pour endlessly from the sun, the radiation that would otherwise strip away the air and scour the surface bare. The Earth's deep iron heart, set spinning in part by the violence of its birth, generates this quiet protection, this gentle shield that lets the atmosphere endure and the surface stay safe. How easily the world might have been left unprotected. And consider the moon, born of catastrophe, holding the earth steady on its axis across the long ages. Without it, the world might have tipped and wobbled wildly, throwing its surface into shifting extremes too violent for life to find a foothold. But the moon held the tilt, gentle and stable, gave the seasons their soft and reliable rhythm, let the world be predictable enough for living things to take hold and endure. How easily there might have been no steadying companion at all. Do you see how many things had to be right? The distance from the Sunday, the presence of liquid water, the shield around the planet, the steadiness the moon provided. Each one a condition, each one fragile, each one a thing that might so easily have gone another way. And all of them somehow fell into place at once. On this one world, in this one quiet corner of the dark. Sit with that for a moment, gently. Not with worry, but with wonder. The window was so narrow, and yet it opened. On this world, against the long odds, the window opened. And in the early seas of that improbable world, something began. We do not know exactly how, and that not knowing is part of the beauty. But somewhere in the young oceans, perhaps in the warm dark near vents in the sea floor where heat and minerals poured up from below, perhaps in shallow pools at the water's edge, the simple chemistry of the early earth began to arrange itself into something new. The carbon forged in stars, the water gathered from the dark, the energy pouring from the sun and rising from the deep, all of it came together, slowly, into patterns that could hold themselves, that could copy themselves, that could persist. The first living things were almost nothing at all. Single tiny cells, simpler than anything you could see, drifting in the early seas. They had no thoughts, no senses, no awareness of any kind. They were only small parcels of chemistry that had found a way to keep going, to take in energy and to make more of themselves, to persist where everything around them simply dissolved. But that was enough. That was the beginning. In the quiet seas of the young world, life had begun. And now I want you to feel the time that follows, because the time is the wonder of this part of the journey, not the events, but the sheer, soft vastness of the ages across which they unfolded. For a very long while, life remained simple. The early seas held only those single tiny cells, drifting and dividing, for ages so long they softened the mind to consider. Not for years, not for thousands of years, for hundreds of millions of years, and then for billions. Life was only this, only the simplest living things, quietly persisting in the seas. Let that settle, slowly. The world turned, day into night, season into season, for span after span of time so vast it has no real shape in the mind. And through all of it, life simply continued, simple and patient, in no hurry at all. There is no rush in this story. There was never any rush. Life took its time. It took an ocean of time, an unimaginable depth of years, and across that ocean, things slowly arranged themselves. Slowly, the simple cells changed. Slowly, some of them found ways to capture the light of the sun, to drink in its energy and release, as a byproduct, the oxygen that would one day fill the air in the seas, the very oxygen you are breathing now. Slowly, across more ages than the mind can hold, that oxygen gathered, transforming the world, filling the atmosphere, making possible kinds of life that had never been possible before. Slowly, some cells found ways to join together, to live in cooperation, to become something more than single specks of chemistry. Slowly, the first more complex living things emerged, still small, still simple by any measure you would recognize, but a step beyond what came before. And slowly, slowly, across the deep ocean of time, complexity unfolded. Do you feel the rhythm of it? The patience? Nothing happened quickly. Nothing was forced. Across spans of time so vast they are almost restful to consider, the living things of the early seas slowly became more. The simple gave rise to the slightly less simple. The single cell gave rise to the gathering of cells, and each step took ages, took depths of time so great that the mind can only soften before them and let them be. This is the part to rest in most deeply, this great patient unfolding. Lifetimes upon lifetimes upon lifetimes, more than could ever be counted, in which living things slowly arrange themselves into greater and greater complexity, all within the gentle window that the improbable world had opened. And yes, across those vast ages, things changed. Worlds within the world rose and faded. Kinds of living things flourished for a time, and then gave way to others. There were great turnings, slow shiftings of climate and sea and land, and in those turnings, many forms of life passed away, making room for new ones to arise. But I want you to hold even this gently, without alarm. Across the long ocean of time, change is simply the shape of things. What passed away made room. What ended allowed new beginnings. The great turnings were not catastrophes to be feared, but part of the slow shaping, the patient sculpting of life into ever new forms. Like the tide going out so that it can come in again, the long story of life moved through its changes without hurry, without fear, simply unfolding. And across all of it, the window held. The distance from the sun stayed gentle. The water remained. The shield endured. The moon held the world steady. The narrow band of livable conditions, opened so improbably at the start, stayed open across the deep ages, allowing life to continue its slow becoming. Let yourself drift along that ocean of time now, as your breathing slows. The seas filled with living things, more and more varied, more and more complex. Life moved from the water onto the land, slowly, across more ages, finding ways to live in air and on stone. Green spread across the surface of the world, the first plants gathering the light of the sun, the land turning slowly from bare rock to something living and soft. Forests rose. The world grew rich with life, layer upon layer of it. All of it descended from those first simple cells in the early seas, all of it shaped by the long, patient ages. And still the story unfolded, slowly, without hurry. Living things grew more complex still. Some developed senses, ways of feeling the world around them, ways of responding to light and warmth and movement. Some developed the first faint stirrings of something like awareness, the simplest beginnings of a creature knowing its surroundings. Across the deep ocean of time, life was slowly, slowly building towards something that had never existed before. Something that could one day not only live, but know that it was living. Something that could one day look up. But that was still far off. For now, simply rest in the long unfolding, the patient becoming, the world filling slowly with living things across spans of time too vast to truly hold. And here is the tender thing I want to leave you with tonight, as you settle towards sleep. Through all of this, across the entire ocean of time, the world had no idea how improbable it was. The living things in the early seas did not know that they existed only because of a flaw in the mirror at the beginning of everything, the one particle in a billion that escaped the Great Erasure. They did not know that the carbon in their simple bodies had been forged in the hearts of stars that died long before the Earth was born. They did not know that their world had been built by a catastrophe, struck so hard that part of it became a moon, and that the moon was the very thing holding their world steady enough to live upon. They did not know how narrow the window was, how easily none of it might have happened. They simply lived. They drifted and divided in the quiet seas, slowly becoming more, across the long, patient ages, unaware of the impossible chain of accidents that had allowed them to exist at all. And as the ages passed and life grew rich and varied and complex, as the seas and the land filled with living things, this remained true. A world full of life, teeming and green and abundant, unfolding slowly across the deep ocean of time, and none of it knowing, none of it aware of the great erasure, the dying stars, the world-shattering collision, the narrow window, none of it knowing how unlikely its own existence truly was. There is something so gentle in that. A whole living world, going about its slow becoming, held safe within a window opened by a chain of accidents it could never see. Cradled, unknowing, in the improbable calm that violence and patience had built for it. Let that hold you now, as you drift. You came from that unfolding. Every living thing that ever was, the simple cells in the early seas, the green spreading across the land, the forests, all of it is part of the same long, patient story that would one day arrive at you. You are the far end of that ocean of time, the place where the slow becoming finally produced something that could look up and wonder, something that could hear a quiet voice in the dark, describe the whole improbable journey, and feel the wonder of it. But the world that was filling with life did not know you were coming. It only lived, slowly, patiently, across the deep ages, unaware of how improbable it all was, unaware of the accidents that had allowed it, unaware of everything except the simple continuing of life. A world full of living things, turning gently in the dark, steadied by a moon born of catastrophe, warmed by a sun at just the right distance, wrapped in oceans gathered from the deep, sheltered by an invisible shield, held, all of it, in a narrow window that had opened against impossible odds, and that stayed open, gently, across the long ocean of time. Let your breath grow slow, and even now, like the patient turning of that living world, there is no hurry. There was never any hurry. The story took an ocean of time, and you can rest in its depth, carried gently by the same patience that carried life from a single cell towards something that could one day look up at the stars. The world is full of life now, in this part of the story. It does not yet know its own beginning, but it is alive, and it is safe, and it is slowly, slowly becoming. And you can drift now into sleep, held by the long, quiet shaping of everything that came before you, resting on a living world that does not yet know how loved by chance it truly is. The ocean of time flows on, gently, and you flow with it, downward, into rest. Let us return to the early seas, to the young blue world wrapped in its quiet oceans, and let us slow down now, more than we ever have, because what happened next did not happen quickly. It happened across an ocean of time, and tonight we are going to float upon that ocean gently and feel just how deep it truly was. In the warm waters of the young world, something began that the universe had never made before. Not a star, not a planet, something smaller and in its own way far stranger, a parcel of matter that could keep itself going. Think of what that means, softly, as you settle, All across the young earth, in the seas and on the stone, matter simply did what matter does. It gathered and scattered. It formed and dissolved. A pattern would appear and then fade, the way a ripple appears on water and then smooths away. Nothing held, nothing lasted. Everything that came together eventually came apart. And then, somewhere in the early seas, something came together and did not come apart. It held itself. It took in what it needed from the water around it, and it used that to keep its own pattern going, to stay itself a little longer. And then, most astonishing of all, it made another like itself, a copy, a second, small pattern, carrying the same way of holding together, drifting off into the seas to do the same. Chemistry had learned to copy itself. Let that reframe settle into you slowly, because it is one of the quiet miracles of the whole story. In a world where everything dissolved, a parcel of matter found a way to persist. And not only to persist, but to repeat itself, to make more of itself, to send copies of its own pattern out into the water. The matter of the young earth had found a way to refuse, gently, to come apart, to continue, to carry on. That was life, the first life. Not a creature you would recognize, not a thing with eyes or limbs or any awareness at all. Only the simplest possible living thing, a tiny pattern of chemistry that could hold itself together and make more of itself, drifting in the early seas. Where did it first hold together? We do not know for certain, and the not knowing is part of the gentleness. But there are quiet places where it may have begun. Picture the deep dark of the early seafloor, far below the surface, where there was no light at all. And in that dark, imagine warmth rising from below, from cracks in the floor of the young world where heat and minerals poured up out of the deep. Around those vents, the water was warm and rich, full of the simple ingredients from which life might assemble itself, fed endlessly by the energy rising from within the earth. In that warm dark, sheltered from the harshness above, the first living patterns may have first held themselves together, drinking the energy of the world itself. Or picture the shallow pools at the water's edge, where the seas met the early land, warmed by the sun, gently stirred, drying and filling and drying again. These small pools may have concentrated the ingredients of life, pressing them close enough, often enough, that at last the right pattern formed and held. A quiet pool at the edge of an ancient sea, and within it, the first faint stirring of something alive. We do not know which. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither, exactly. But somewhere in the warm dark or the shallow light, in the young seas of the improbable world, life began. The matter that had survived the great erasure, forged in stars and gathered into a world, found a way to hold itself together and continue. And then, for a very long time, that was all. This is the part I want you to sink into most deeply tonight, the long age when life stayed simple. Because it is so easy to rush past it, to imagine that once life began, it quickly became forests and creatures and all the richness you know. But it did not. For ages upon ages, life remained nothing more than those simplest patterns, single tiny cells, drifting and dividing in the seas. Not for years, not for thousands of years, for hundreds of millions of years, and then for longer still. Let that settle, slowly, without alarm. The world turned, day into night, season into season, and the only life upon it was the simplest life, the single cells, quietly persisting in the water. The seas held them, and they drifted, and they divided, and they made more of themselves, for span after span of time so vast it has no real shape in the mind. And there is something deeply restful in that, if you let there be. Life was in no hurry. Life took its time. It had found a way to continue, and continuing was enough, for ages longer than you could ever count. The simplest living things drifted in the early seas, holding themselves together, making more of themselves, asking nothing, becoming nothing in particular, simply being alive for an ocean of years. Float on that ocean now. Feel how deep it is. The simple cells drifting in the warm water, age after age after age, the world turning quietly around them, nothing changing, nothing rushing, only the patient continuing of the simplest life. Breathe slowly, in time with that patience. And then, across that long stillness, the first great change began. Not suddenly, nothing in this story is sudden, but slowly, gently, some of the simplest living things found a new way to live. They learned to drink the light. Until then, life had taken its energy from the warmth of the world, from the chemistry of the seas. But some of the simple cells found a way to capture the light of the sun directly, to take that pouring energy from the sky and use it to hold themselves together and grow. They turned their faces, in their own simple way, toward the light, and they drank it. And as they drank the light, they breathed something out. Oxygen. The oxygen you are breathing now, in this very moment, slow and easy, in and out. That oxygen was not always in the world. The early air had almost none of it. It was these simple living things, drinking the sun and breathing out oxygen, that slowly, slowly filled the world with it. And I do mean slowly. This is where the depth of time becomes almost something you can feel. The simple cells breathed out their oxygen, and at first it did not gather. It was taken up by the rocks and the seas, absorbed and locked away, so that for a long age the air stayed nearly empty of it despite all that quiet breathing. The living things breathed and breathed and breathed, across spans of time too vast to picture, before the oxygen finally began to gather in the air at all. Think of how patient that is. A whole world of simple living things, breathing out oxygen for ages upon ages, and the world simply soaking it up, until at last, after unimaginable time, the seas and the rocks could hold no more, and the oxygen began, gently, to fill the air. And as it filled the air, it remade the world. The oxygen that these simple cells breathed out across the deep ages became the air that wraps the planet now. It became the very thing that you and nearly every living creature would one day need to breathe. The simplest life, drinking the sun in the early seas, slowly and without any intention, prepared the air for everything that would ever come after. They could not know it. They had no knowing in them at all. But across the ocean of time, their quiet breathing transformed the whole world. Let that hold you for a moment. The air in your chest, right now, is the gift of the simplest living things, breathing across spans of time so vast they soften the mind. Every breath you take tonight is an inheritance from those early cells, drinking the light in the ancient seas. Breathe it in, slowly, breathe it out, and still, even after all of this, life remained simple. The single cells now drank the light, now breathed out oxygen, now filled the world with the air of the future, but they were still single cells, still the simplest of living things, drifting in the seas. The ocean of time flowed on, and life floated upon it, patient as ever. And then, gently, came another step. The single cells began to live together. For so long, each living thing had been alone, a single pattern of chemistry, holding itself together by itself. But slowly, across more of the deep ages, some of these single cells found that they could live in cooperation, joining together, sharing the work of staying alive. Where one cell had done everything for itself, now many cells could live as one, each helping the others, each doing its part. Feel the relationship in that, the way one thing enabled the next. Because cells could live together, they could become more than any single cell could ever be. Cooperation allowed complexity, and complexity allowed entirely new ways of living. A gathering of cells could grow larger than any single cell, could take on shapes and abilities that no lone cell could manage, could become something genuinely new in the world. This is how all the larger life you know eventually came to be. Not by single cells growing huge, but by cells learning to live together, gathering into greater and greater cooperation, until the seas began to hold living things made of many cells working as one. And so the seas slowly filled with more varied life. Where once there had been only the simplest single cells, now there were living things of many kinds, larger and more complex, drifting and swimming and settling on the seafloor. The ocean of time carried life from the single cell toward the gathering of cells, toward variety, toward richness, all of it unfolding gently, across ages upon ages, with no hurry at all. Let yourself drift through that filling of the seas. Imagine the early oceans, age after age, growing slowly richer with life. New kinds of living things, more complex, more varied, appearing across the deep time, each one a further step in the long, slow becoming. The seas were no longer empty. They were filling gently with the patient unfolding of life. And then, across more of the great ages, life did something it had never done before. It left the water. For all of its long history, life had lived in the seas. The water was where it began, where it held itself together, where it slowly became more complex. The land above was bare, stone and dust, swept by wind and rain, holding nothing alive. For ages upon ages, the land was empty, while the seas grew full. But slowly, gently, living things found ways to live at the water's edge, and then beyond it, to hold moisture within themselves, to withstand the open air, to live upon the bare stone, where nothing had lived before. It was not a sudden conquest. It was a patient migration across spans of time too vast to picture, life reaching gently out of the water and onto the land. And as it did, the green began to spread. Picture the bare stone of the early land, grey and empty, age after age, and then, slowly, the first green appearing at the water's edge. Simple living things that could drink the sun, spreading onto the land, turning the bare stone, ever so gradually, into something living and soft. The green spread across the deep ages, from the water's edge outward, covering more and more of the empty land, until the grey world slowly turned green, and from that green, in time, rose the first forests. Imagine it, gently. A world that had been bare stone for almost all of its history, slowly growing green, and then slowly growing tall. The first forests rising across the deep ages, the land filling with living things as the seas had filled before, layer upon layer of life, all of it descended from those first simple cells in the early seas, all of it shaped by the long, patient ocean of time. Turn each of these like the pages of a quiet book, the single cell, the drinking of light, the filling of the air, the gathering of cells, the filling of the seas, the migration onto land. the spreading of the green, the rising of the forests, each one a gentle turning, each one taking ages, each one carrying life a little further in its slow becoming. Now, there is a general truth in all of this, and it is a comforting one. Across the deep ages, life spread steadily, growing richer and more varied and more complex, filling the seas and then the land, page by patient page. But here is a fascinating exception, set gently beside that rule. The spreading was not always steady. There were long, long stretches when almost nothing changed at all. Think of that, softly. We imagine the story of life as a steady climb, always becoming more, always growing richer. But for vast spans of the deep time, life simply held where it was. There were ages, immensely long ages, when the world stayed nearly the same, when the simple living things drifted and divided and changed almost not at all, for stretches of time longer than everything that came after them combined. The long, quiet plateaus, where life rested at one stage for ages upon ages before the next gentle step. The slow becoming was not a steady climb, but a patient thing, full of long stillnesses, full of vast unhurried pauses where the world simply continued as it was. And there is such rest in that, in knowing that even the great story of life spent most of its time simply being, quietly, without changing, floating on the ocean of time. And yes, across all these ages, the world itself slowly turned and shifted. The climate changed, gently warming and cooling across the deep time. The seas rose and fell. The very land drifted and rearranged itself, slower than anything you could ever watch. And in those great slow turnings, the living things changed too. Some kinds flourished for an age, and then gently gave way to others. What thrived in one age made room, in time, for what would thrive in the next. But hold even this softly, without any alarm. The great turnings were not catastrophes to be feared. They were part of the long, quiet shaping, the patient sculpting of life into ever new forms. Like the tide going out so that it can come in again, the story of life moved through its changes, without hurry and without fear. What passed away made room. What ended allowed new beginnings. The slow becoming flowed on, gently, through all its turnings, carrying life ever forward across the deep ages. The tide goes out, the tide comes in, and the ocean of time flows on. Let that rhythm carry you now, as you settle deeper, the patient turning of the world, the gentle shaping of life, the long ages flowing one into the next, without hurry, without fear, only the slow becoming, page after quiet page. And through all of it, across the entire ocean of time, the world had no idea how improbable it was. This is the tenderness I keep returning to, because it sits beneath everything. The simple cells in the early seas did not know that they existed only because of a flaw in the mirror, the beginning of everything, the one survivor in a billion that escaped the great erasure. The green spreading across the land did not know that the carbon it was built from had been forged in the hearts of stars that died long before the earth was born. The first forest did not know that their world had been built by a catastrophe, struck so hard that part of it became a moon, and that the moon was the very thing holding their world steady enough to live upon. None of it knew, none of it could know. Life simply lived, drifting and dividing, gathering and spreading, becoming slowly more across the deep ages, entirely unaware of the impossible chain of accidents that had allowed it to exist at all. A whole living world, growing richer and greener and more complex, held safe within a window opened by a chain of events it could never see. Cradled, unknowing, in the improbable calm that erasure and starlight and collision and patience had built for it. There is something so gentle in that, to be held and not to know you are held, to be the result of so much improbability, and simply to live quietly in the warm seas and the green land, becoming slowly more, never once aware of the vast and unlikely story that made you possible. Let that hold you now as you drift towards sleep. The world was filling with life across the deep ages, and none of it knew its own beginning. It only lived. It only continued. It only became, slowly, page by patient page, more varied and more complex, while remaining entirely unaware of the great erasure, the dying stars, the world-shattering collision, the narrow window. It lived, unknowing, and that unknowing was its peace. And now, near the end of this long becoming, life came at last to a new threshold. For almost all of its history, living things had lived without any awareness at all. The simple cells, the gathering of cells, the green upon the land, the rising forests, none of them sensed the world, none of them felt anything, none of them knew. They simply lived. But slowly, across the deep ages, some living things began to feel. Faintly at first, the simplest ability to sense the world around them, to respond to light, to warmth, to movement, to turn toward what helped them and away from what harmed them. Not yet thought, not yet knowing. Only the faintest first stirring of a creature taking in the world and answering it. And across more of the deep time, that faint sensing slowly deepened. Living things developed ways of feeling more, of responding more, of carrying within them some small awareness of their surroundings. The simplest beginnings of senses, the simplest stirrings of something that, ages and ages later, might one day become a mind. It was not knowing yet. It was almost knowing, the very edge of awareness, the first faint light of something within the living world beginning to wake, creatures that could sense and respond and feel, but not yet wonder, not yet ask, not yet look up at the stars and ask where they came from. That was still far off, still ages away, across more of the patient deep time, but the threshold had been reached. The slow becoming had carried life all the way from a single pattern of chemistry in the early seas to creatures that could feel the world around them, that stood at the very edge of awareness, almost, not quite, beginning to know. Let yourself rest there, at that threshold, as your breathing slows and the day drifts far away. A living world, full and green and varied, risen across an ocean of time from the simplest single cell, drinking the light, breathing the air it had made, gathering into greater complexity, spreading from the seas onto the land, turning gently through its long, slow shaping, through its quiet plateaus and its patient changes, never hurrying, never afraid. And within it now, the first faint stirrings of feeling, the very edge of awareness. Life standing quietly at the threshold of knowing, not yet aware of itself, not yet aware of the vast improbable story that made it, but reaching, slowly, toward the moment when something would finally look up. Float there now, on the deep ocean of time. There is no hurry. There was never any hurry. The story took ages upon ages, and you can rest in its depth, carried gently by the same patience that carried life from a single cell toward the edge of a waking mind. The world is full of life now, sensing, feeling, almost knowing. It does not yet understand its own beginning, But it is alive, and it is safe, and it is slowly, slowly waking. And you can drift now into sleep, held by the long, quiet shaping of everything that came before you, resting on a living world that is just beginning, faintly, to feel. The ocean of time flows on, gently. The tide goes out, and the tide comes in, and you flow with it, downward, into rest. We left a world full of life, turning gently in the dark, unaware of how improbable it was. Tonight we follow that world to the strangest moment in the whole long story, the moment it began to know. For most of the great ocean of time, life simply lived. It drifted, it grew, it became more complex, but it did not understand. The seas were full of creatures that felt the world without ever wondering about it. The land filled with living things that moved and rested and continued, never once asking how any of it came to be. And then, slowly, across more ages, something new began to stir. Some living things grew minds, not all at once, but gently, across the deep patient time. Senses sharpened into awareness, awareness deepened into thought. And somewhere in that long unfolding, on this one small world, a kind of creature emerged that could do something nothing had ever done before. It could wander. It could look up at the night sky and ask where the stars came from. It could look at its own hands and ask what it was made of. It could trace the long story backward, instant by instant, all the way to the beginning, and begin, slowly, to understand. Sit with how strange that is. The universe began as energy turning into matter. It nearly erased itself completely. What survived was a thin dust, the leftover of an almost perfect cancellation. That dust became gas. The gas became stars. The stars forged heavier substance and died and scattered it across the dark. And that scattered substance gathered into worlds. And on one of those worlds, after an ocean of time, the dust arranged itself into something that could look back and know where it came from. The leftover dust learned to wonder about itself. Let that settle, slowly, in the quiet. You are made of that dust. The atoms in you are the survivors of the great erasure, forged in stars, scattered in their dying, gathered into a world built by collision and gentled by time. And those same atoms, arranged into you, can now understand the story of their own beginning. The universe, through you, has become aware of itself. That is the strangest and most tender truth in all of this. We are the universe, looking back at how it began. We are the survivors of an erasure, gazing across billions of years at the moment we almost did not happen. The dust that should not be here has become something that can marvel at being here at all. You are the cosmos, grown able to wonder. Let your breath slow now. We are near the end of the journey, and there is nothing left to do but gather it gently and let it go. Feel yourself here, in this moment, resting in the dark, breathing slowly, growing heavy and warm. You are lying on a world that should not exist, a world built by a mistake, and you are made of substance that should have vanished long ago. And yet here you are, breathing, safe, held by the very improbability that made you. Let us gather the journey now, and let each piece drift away. We began in the heat of the beginning, the great dance of matter and antimatter, opposites born together, destroying each other again and again. A balance so perfect it should have left nothing at all. Let that drift away now. We found the flaw in the mirror, the one particle in a billion that escaped. the faint imbalance that left behind a little dust. Everything solid, the residue of an almost complete erasure. Let that drift away too. We watch the dust become gas, and the gas become stars. The forges in the dark, cooking carbon and oxygen and iron. The stars living and dying and scattering their gifts. The substance of you, made in ancient fire, let that drift away, gently. We narrowed to one quiet corner, a collapsing cloud, a young sun, a swirling disk, and the great collision that built your world, the catastrophe that became a moon, the violence that turned, somehow, toward calm. Let that drift away. We found the narrow window, the distance from the sun, the water, the shield, the steadying moon, the slow unfolding of life across an ocean of time, from a single cell toward something that could look up. Let that drift away too. And we arrived here, at you, the dust become aware, the universe looking back at itself. Across all that time, let it all drift, softly, into the dark. You do not need to hold any of it now. You traveled the whole long way, from the first instant to this one. That is enough. You can set it down. If you would like to wander further another night, there is more of the cosmos waiting, gently, whenever you wish to return. But not now. Now there is only rest. Let yourself grow heavier. Feel the weight of your body, soft against the place where you lie. Feel your breath, slow and easy, moving in and out without effort. You are safe. You are made of starlight and survival. You are resting on an impossible world, under a moon born of fire, beneath stars that made you. And none of it had to happen. But all of it did. And it led, across billions of years, to you, here, now, breathing slowly in the dark. Let your thoughts grow quiet. Let the day fall away. There is nothing to solve, nothing to hold, nothing to do but rest. The universe nearly erased itself, and instead it made you. Breathe in, softly. Breathe out. Let the stars hold you. Let the world hold you. Let sleep come, gentle and warm. You are home. Rest now. Rest.